I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Urbana City Council for Monday, September 13th, 2021. Need to read a disclaimer first. Pursuant to the gubernatorial disaster proclamation and the declaration of emergency for the city of Urbana, Illinois, related to the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with changes to the Open Meetings Act, Public Act 101-0640, it's been determined that an in-person public meeting is not prudent or safe at this time. Members of the public body will attend remotely using Zoom webinar. Members of the public may attend via Zoom or view meetings remotely on Urbana Public Television through Comcast Xfinity on channels 6 and 1096, i3 Broadband on channel 6, AT&T Uverse on channel 99, and streamed on the web at livestream.com/Urbana. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Here.
Mr. Evans?
Here.
Ms. Hersey?
Here.
Ms. Colasetti?
Here.
Ms. Bishop?
Present.
Ms. Wilkin?
Here.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Here.
Mayor Marlin?
Here. All right. Item C is additions to the agenda. I do have one request. We need to move item 2B, which is under the regular agenda, the ordinance 2021-08-038 to new business, the first item under new business. Can I have a motion to that effect?
I'll make a motion that we move item 2B to be new business as the second item on new business. Is that correct?
First item.
First item.
Yeah.
I'll second.
Thank you. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes. Grace?
Thank you. I want to move another addition to the agenda of a discussion item at the end. So I guess maybe item K and moving the adjournment down. And if there is a, wherever in the agenda, an update about the ARPA discussion from Carol, if we could move that there and have a discussion on how to set general council priorities and how that ARPA update and how that process will work.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Was that Chandra?
Yes.
Okay. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
That motion passes. Okay, next item on the agenda, presentations and public input. We don't have any presentations scheduled for tonight. We'll start with public input. First up is Alan Max Axelrod.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking to you today in my capacity as a co-chair of the Champaign-Urbana Democratic Socialists of America. During the Cunningham Township Board meeting, literature was made available to the public on the order of 5,000 handbills. We have so far distributed well above that number and would love to include that literature as well. We have done so every week since April of this year and are going to continue to do this as part of our long-term operations. The Cunningham Township has historically printed a lot of their business cards using union printers. Our organization does not have the funds currently for union printing. I hope that by distributing the Cunningham Township's literature, not only can we do some additional good because there is some information not included in our current handbook that we hand out, but we would also be in turn supporting union printing. That said, I want to point to people's attention that today is the first day in over a month below 2,000 coronavirus cases in the state of Illinois. A big part of that was Governor Pritzker further extending the eviction moratorium through October 3rd in this state. Let me remind you that with the No Ameren Shutoffs campaign, we have seen the governor say one thing, then the conditions and advocacy change, and then he says another. Case in point, April 5th, when he said he was only going to be using vaccines to fight the growing coronavirus caseloads when we had over 6 figures in our average vaccination rate. We're still nowhere near that. 17 days after resolutions were passed by Urbana and an initiative in Bloomington, he then allocated tens of millions of dollars, upwards to approaching $115 million in utility assistance. He had previously been published as saying that in August, the eviction moratorium would lapse. Obviously, things have changed. I also want to note that the ability to go online for public meetings has never been rescinded. It was always made available by the ongoing proclamations of disaster that even after the state of Illinois opened, were routinely and monthly reissued by the governor. You can look this up on the executive orders listing page. The other thing that I want to say is that in the context of all of this, we have been speaking to you for months about advocating internally for the state government to pay people to get vaccinated after President Biden had also said the same thing. Actually, we said it a bit before, but he also had some remarks back in April if you want to get nitpicky about it. The reason that I bring all that up is because last week he had said that he is directing OSHA to have every business with above 100 employees to be required to provide paid leave to get vaccinated. This is nowhere near enough, but what it does is it provides political cover to the people on this body who may have not been, willing to advocate as strongly due to the political ecosystem. The president has demonstrated himself, ironically, to be further left than our own governor. Lastly, I just want to reiterate the campaign promises made in the face of this contract vote. 3 people ran on reimagining the police, Diane Marlin, Christopher Evans, as well as Chandra Bishop, and 2 people ran on defunding the police, Jaya Colasetti and Grace Wilkins. I hope to see that tonight's vote reflects that. Have a good night.
Thank you. Next up is Tracy Chong.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Tracy Chong. Council members, it has been 18 months since collective bargaining agreement negotiation process with the Fraternal Order of Police was initiated in 2020. From what I understand, it seems like the old city council, and now you guys, the new city council, has been kept pretty much in the dark during this whole negotiation process. And only last week did council members and the public have the opportunity to see the proposed contract. Given that you guys are going to vote on an over $30 million contract, I'm wondering, with such short notice, how careful each of you have been studying the 64-page document. I'm wondering, what is the hurry in getting this resolution passed, especially considering how policing issues have been at the forefront of public concern? I would like to know, are all of you okay with the statement in the contract regarding the Urbana Civilian Police Review Board saying that the city is agreeing that no person convicted of a felony shall be eligible for appointment to the CPRB? The public and CPRB members have brought up this issue this concern numerous times, and CPRB members have even come forward to council to speak about how this discriminatory and illegal requirement should be removed. I would really like to know, are council members aware of this promise that the city is making to the police? If you are aware, I'm really surprised that you're okay with Urbana agreeing that no person convicted of a felony shall be eligible for appointment to the CPRB. Considering that this discriminatory requirement is in blatant disregard for Urbana's human rights law. Thank you.
Next up is Eldris Melinda Carr.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Marlin and members of the City Council. I sent an email late, so I'm sure you won't have time to look at it, but it was to the current membership or current leadership, because you may not have seen it. We sent it back in February, so I'm going to read some things that's related to the collective bargaining resolution tonight. We understand some areas of the proposal are still under development. This is related to the use of force, because we submitted information on the use of force, some information on the Civilian Review Board, and information on oversight. So the oversight is really related to the collective bargaining. So I'm going to read some areas of this letter that I feel are related to what you're going to be talking about tonight. We understand some areas of the proposal are still in development and will be reviewed with the UPD, mayor, and city council as appropriate. At this time, that was February. Procedures for reporting incidents involving the use of force in the department to the Use of Force Review Board and the Civilian Review Board. Currently pending are substantial recommendations from a petition to the Civilian Police Review Board. And it was categorized as a petition and updates to state laws and police and criminal justice reforms. And then I'm gonna go down to accountability remains a major concern of the Minister Alliance, in line with the recommendations we submitted to the use of force review process that was back in November 20th, 2020. The Minister Alliance asks that careful attention be given to oversight recommendations from last November. With respect to disciplinary authority, we noted the following significant difference between Urbana and Champaign. The city of Urbana, the chief of police has final department authority for police discipline. The chief of police may also delegate disciplinary authority to supervisors, but only the chief of police has authority to carry out certain actions as outlined in the policy referenced disciplinary policy 322. It appears the mayor may only has authority to appoint the police chief with approval of a city council. In the complaint process, the mayor has a final authority to, or in matters where there are differences in the determination of the outcome by the chief and the CPRB. This information, I have a reference, and when you go back, you'll be able to look at this. In the city of Champaign, in a reference to the municipal code, pursuant to the collective bargaining agreement, only the police chief and the city manager are empowered to impose discipline. And I have a link to that information in the letter that you'll see, the email. And then I have the link below is an example of Champaign's disciplinary process being imposed by the city manager. The chief did not rule on this because there was probably a conflict of interest at the time, and you'll see the link. Therefore, the mayor of Urbana must be able to make difficult decisions regarding discipline for departmental leadership when warranted, and the CPRB appeal process must be independent enough to detect situations that may be overlooked. I don't have time. If you allow me the time to read this, I'll pause because I know my time is up.
Thank you very much. Move on to C.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I need to update my name. This is Christopher Hansen. I'm C. I have been trying to figure out, the new council has been sitting for a few months now, and I'm trying to understand when and where in your terms you're ever going to affect the changes that you espoused during your campaigns. What I've observed so far is essentially something along the lines of the mayor throws a temper tantrum and you guys just roll over and do what she wants, maybe with a few strong words, but you generally just vote the way the mayor wants you to vote. And if that's what's happening, then I don't understand why you're there. Maybe you'll explain that later in the discussion item that Ms. Wilkin added to the agenda. In regards to the appointment process, I really don't understand why you guys are discussing changing any of this. Why is this suddenly a problem this year when we have new council members? Why wasn't this a problem the last decade, appointing all of these appointees and the council approving them and discussing them year over year? I just don't understand it. And since we know with certainty that many of Mayor Marlin's appointees engage in misconduct and break the law, and that's not just my opinion, that's the opinion of the Illinois Attorney General, don't we need more oversight in these appointments, not less? I just can't understand it. And this FOP contract, I sent you guys an email a little while ago. This contract was initiated for negotiation, I think, in March of 2020, according to the mayor. And my email asked the city council members, and it was just before the meeting, so I don't blame you for not responding, what participation you've had in this process. And I think the answer is 0. I'm not sure, but I suspect that's the answer. And I wonder if the public has been given any exposure to this process. And I think the answer is no. And so we have the 10 shared principles, and it talks about transparency and including the public. And we have the Open Meetings Act, and we have the FOIA law, which allows for the public to access records and participate in their government. And we know the mayor and her appointees do not like those things because they invite the public to, probably from her perspective, meddle with her agenda. So the mayor's appointees engage in misconduct and they violate the FOIA law, and the mayor violates the Open Meetings Act. And I wonder if you had just actually let the public participate, if things would go a little bit smoother. So Ms. Trong pointed out earlier that in the end of this 64-page FOP document you've uploaded here, that it reinforces the prohibition that no person convicted of a felony shall be eligible for appointment to the CPRB. Now, we know that the CPRB has already resolved, and I believe they voted on this, to remove that prohibition from the CPRB ordinance. We know that prohibition is already a violation of our human rights laws. You cannot discriminate against someone because of their past arrest record. And the council before you, by the way, reinforced with perfect clarity that the city itself is subject to those laws. So as far as I can tell, unless I'm misunderstanding something here in this 64-page document, and admittedly I didn't read the whole thing through, if you vote to pass this, it would be illegal because this FOP contract would be violating our human rights laws. Am I missing something there? If I am, I hope you'll explain it to me. I don't think you should pass a contract that explicitly violates our own human rights laws. And I don't know the legal consequences of you doing something like that. I don't think this is going to be a mess that's easily cleaned up. So I hope you'll discuss that tonight and discover a solution there. Thank you.
Next up is Julie Watkins.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, I'm Julie Watkins. I hope everybody is safe and continues to be safe. And I want to thank others previous for their public comment. After watching last week's meeting and listening to public council and city staff comment about the new police contract, I heard a lot of frustration. I think the source of that has been the same origin as struggles with USA election law and procedures. How we vote and if we vote depends on where we live. Even if the local geography and weather patterns are the same, even if population density is the same. Why? Because local election laws are an accumulation of laws and policies written by those in power hoping to stay in power. That's not small d democratic. That's taking advantage of the system. So back to the police contract. There is a state law that says we have to do things a certain way. And the consequences of this was a surprise and frustration to some members who wanted to participate meaningfully with the contract negotiation and fulfill promises to their constituents. Some other people last week were presenting this law as neutral. It's there, so it has to be followed. But considering what I said earlier about election and voting laws, we can't assume the law is neutral. Considering the amount of frustration that happened, it's more likely than not than that the law's origins were about power. Going forward, the response to the consequences of that law ought to include how to best make those consequences reasonable and neutral. And we shouldn't have to wait 2 years. Discretionary stuff can happen. It was stated last week that the contract is separate from CPRB. Now, I just learned from previous speakers that's not quite true. So I hope you don't pass that contract with that sentence in it. And it isn't what I heard last year during public comment and council and city staff response to public comment about CPRB. CPRB is about accountability. In the interest of public trust, I hope future CPRB meetings won't have issues about the contract besides who's sitting on that board. Last year, and I think before, the contract was brought up to stop CPRB actions when they were trying to deal with accountability. We're assured that the contract doesn't affect CPRB, but yes, it does. I hope that you can correct that. That changes in the new contract allowed city negotiator to make that assurance. So I hope that for other reasons, I hope CPRB will go different this year and we won't have last year's difficulties. Thank you for your consideration of this matters.
Thank you. Next up is Sarah Nixon.
Hello, City Council. This is Sarah Nixon. I would like to express my agreement with the comments made by Ms. Watkins, Mr. Hanson, and Ms. Chong. And I would like to add my own couple of thoughts with regard to the renewal of or renegotiation of the FOP contract, where in the contract wants to eliminate the possibility of CPRB members being persons with a criminal record. I would like to reiterate what others have expressed this evening and what others have communicated many times to the council over the past year and to the CPRB board. Persons who have had direct criminal justice system involvement, and more specifically, direct experience with police misconduct are the voices that are missing from the Civilian Police Review Board makeup currently. Civilian review boards across the country have been looking at this question, over the past year, and some of them have even prior to the events of last year, did not discriminate and prohibit persons with criminal backgrounds from joining and participating or being appointed to such boards. The perspectives that such people can bring are critically valuable to a police misconduct review board process. What we have currently is a completely lopsided representation with heavy representation or interference. Sometimes it appears even, but presence from the police side, from city administration side, and then there are civilians. But there's a big gap where the people who could speak most directly and cogently, and I think wisely, to the question of misconduct are missing. I know from personal experience, I am someone who does not have a criminal record or conviction, despite what I presume most of you believe. But the fact that I don't is due to a miracle. And the fact that I almost do or almost did is directly due to police misconduct. I and someone like Mr. Christopher Hansen are examples of people who could bring a perspective and examples of people who would strive to do our best to be thoughtful and ethical in any input. I am running out of time, and I would just like to use the last few seconds to acknowledge the tragic death of Alora Yarber on Friday evening in Urbana. And I would like to urge the city and the council to please consider the fact that she may have been fleeing a situation of violence. And this is coming from neighbors who directly witnessed this event and other incidents prior to this. And I would just like to acknowledge her passing and the tragedy that it represents to her family. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else wish to address the Urbana City Council?
I have an email to read.
Okay.
Is email input from Sherry Langendorf, resident of Urbana. Hi, Grace, I'm your constituent, and I believe that you are not elected to run the city. The city council performs legislative duties, not executive ones. There are ordinances to keep our community safe and make sure citizens have resources and are treated fairly. Please read my email at the next city council meeting. Thank you, Sherry Langendorf.
Are there any other email communications? All right, we'll move on to council input and communications. Jaya.
Thank you. I actually want to start by echoing what was just shared in public comment of my thoughts and are with the family of Alora Yarber, who passed away in Ward 4. So thoughts are with her family. That is an area of the city that I know we've had questions about speeding along a related street. So I'm hoping that we can take a look at safety concerns in that area as well. I also want to, on a very different note, recognize and appreciate all the hard work that folks have been doing for Bike to Work Day, which is tomorrow. There is information on the city's website about that and the many locations that are available as well. Additionally, I want to note the comments we're hearing about the FOP contract. I remain committed to a comprehensive review and evaluation of police and public safety in our city. I think that's really important that we continue to work towards that. I agree that there was a lot of frustration at last week's meeting. People commented on how much time council committee members spent in closed session. And part of that was to make sure that we had as much information as possible before we move into this decision. I can say for myself, at the very least, I do read every single document that is given to us. I do have concerns about the inclusion of that language about the CPRB and participants with felony convictions. I also think that the bargaining team that worked on this contract did a remarkable job. So I think that both those things can be true. And I look forward to further discussing it this evening.
Any other council member comments? Grace?
Thank you. Just want to also thank the public for your input and say that I hear overall a call for accountability, transparency, and public involvement. And to say that I agree with those things and we'll keep working on trying to do those and have that be reached the best that I can. So thank you for your involvement and continuing to follow along and give your input.
Any other council members wish to speak at this time? James?
Yeah, I just want to add that when we have closed sessions and there's situations like that, it may not always be apparent, but I would like to thank my fellow council members. I think this council has had some good discussions, and I appreciate the questions my colleagues ask. It's not required that we agree on everything, but it is important that we turn things over in all different directions to understand them. I think as we've been doing this, we've learned some things in the past 4 months that we need to have to be an effective council going forward. And every step of the way where we've had frustration, there has been good discussion about steps that we think we should take to alleviate that in the future, so that as a council that is going to be working together over the next 3.5 years, we're learning how to support each other and how to ask for support from staff and from the mayor to be able to do the best possible job we can. And I think I appreciate that, and I certainly appreciate my colleagues here.
Any other council comments? Chandra?
Good evening, everyone. I'd just like to say that we ran on ideas that we would like to see change. We've been in this position for 4 months. I don't know what sort of habits or changes that you hope to make in that short amount of time. Typically isn't possible even to change a habit that quickly in 4 months. So I'm just asking the public for a little grace as we work through discovering what works and doesn't work. We don't know issues and processes until we're going through them. And for instance, changing the code is something that we're working on because we found so many errors or so many issues with the process. And so when we find issues like that, we are going to work to try to move on them as feasible as the council has the ability to. So change doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in 4 months. We have 4 years. So I'm just reminding the public that things like this take time. Thank you.
Any other council comments? Okay, we'll move on to unfinished business. I don't believe there is any. Reports of the standing committee. Mary Alice Wu.
All right, tonight we have 2 items on the consent agenda. Resolution number 2021-09038R, resolution approving amendment number 1 to a City of Urbana Community Development Block Grant Program Agreement with Family Service of Champaign County project number 2021 CSSP 01. That's the first item. The second item is resolution number 2021-09039R, resolution approving amendment number 1 to a City of Urbana Community Development Block Grant Program agreement with the Champaign County Healthcare Consumers for COVID-19 assistance. Does anybody wish to remove anything from the consent agenda? All right. So as the next step, we just take a vote.
Is there a second?
Oh,
I'll second.
Who was that?
Jaya.
Jaya? Okay. Moved by Mary Alice, seconded by Jaya. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey, Ms. Hersey,
Yes. Sorry.
Ms. Colacetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
That motion passes. Now we'll move to the regular agenda.
All right, on behalf of the committee, resolution number 2021-09040R, resolution approving a collective bargaining agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge number 70 for a term of July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2023. The committee sent this with no recommendation.
Is there a second?
Well, I guess I would have to make a motion,
Yeah,
not on
yeah.
behalf of the committee, but I will make a motion for approval.
Is there a second to get this up for discussion?
A second.
Okay. Attorney Ben Garrett is here. I believe Michelle Brooks is as well. There she is. And then we have City Attorney Dave Wessner. Ben and Michelle, did you want to make some comments first, particularly to help provide context for this agreement? Some folks may be watching tonight who weren't here last week, and it's very important, I think, for the public to understand the context that the council is voting in. Any other things you want to address?
Very good, Mayor. Thank you so much, and thank you, Council, for your time once again tonight. The members of the public, there's been a really good spirited discussion about this contract, which I very much welcome and embrace, and I know the Council does as well. And I know a lot of careful thought has gone into this, which I very much appreciate. One of the members in public comment tonight mentioned the fact that the law is not neutral. And when it comes to collective bargaining with police units in the state of Illinois, that is unfortunately very much the case. The law is not neutral. We are bargaining against a stacked deck, and the deck is stacked against us in the provisions of the Illinois Public Labor Relations Act that do not allow management the discretion to make unilateral implementation of management-oriented changes when we reach a bargaining impasse. Rather, the law is the law that is imposed upon the city and its elected officials is that if we cannot reach a voluntary contract settlement with the police officers, that contract dispute has to be submitted to what is called binding interest arbitration, in which a third-party arbitrator will come into the city of Urbana, most likely not a resident of the city, maybe not even a resident of the state, and dictate to the city what the terms of your collective bargaining agreement will say. And that is a very frustrating reality. It's a reality that I deal with as a part of my daily job as a management side labor attorney. But we do not, unfortunately, have the pleasure of writing Illinois state statute. It's just our job to follow that state statute and to bargain within the reality that has been created with us and the framework that has been created for us by the Illinois state legislature. By way of example, I'll talk about discipline cases involving police officers. It used to be that discipline cases involving police officers would go to the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners, or in the city of Urbana, a Civil Service Commission. Section 8, though, of the Illinois Labor Relations Act specifically says that all disputes arising under a collective bargaining agreement have to be submitted to binding grievance arbitrator, which is where a third-party arbitrator comes in and says whether discipline issued against a police officer will be sustained or not. I hate it. I think it takes away from the judgment and discretion of management. It takes away from the judgment and discretion of police chiefs who know what is and is not acceptable conduct in police departments. And it substitutes the judgment of management for somebody who will walk away from a community and not have to deal with the consequences of their decision. Unfortunately, we can't change that in Urbana. It's built into the Illinois Labor Relations Act. My law firm, as well as others, have fought against Section 8 of the Labor Act. We have fought against it in interest arbitration cases. We have fought against it at the Labor Board. We have fought against it with the General Counsel of the Labor Board. But the act is what it is. So that is the bargaining reality that we're dealing with. Part of that bargaining reality is that interest arbitration is viewed as, quote unquote, a very conservative process. Arbitrators loathe to make changes to the status quo. And they urge that any changes to the status quo have to be bargained at the table. Both sides of the table know that. Both sides know that it is very, very, very difficult to achieve change, significant change in interest arbitration. And because of that, the parties can be recalcitrant in changes that they are opposed to. So when we approach contract negotiations, it's knowing that is the case. That is the reality of the law in Illinois. And I would be remiss if I came to the city of Urbana promising the sun and moon, the moon and the stars, and saying that we were going to be able to rewrite some of these contract provisions ourselves, knowing that reality of interest arbitration. What would happen is you spend a lot of money and time on an interest arbitration hearing simply to be told no. So we strive at every turn to try to reach a voluntary contract settlement that betters the interests and the needs of the community while being mindful of what that alternative to a voluntary contract settlement looks like. So that's the bargaining reality. A couple of other points that I want to address from the open discussion tonight. One is a provision in the CPRB appendix to the collective bargaining agreement that references that members who sit on the CPRB cannot have felony convictions. And I want to emphasize that those are convictions, not simply arrests. There was a suggestion that that provision might be illegal under the city ordinance. I want to let the council know and assure you that it's not illegal for two reasons. First of all, the Illinois Labor Relations Act, Section 15 of the Illinois Labor Relations Act specifies that the provisions of a collective bargaining agreement trump and supersede over any contrary provisions of an Illinois city ordinance or city code. So that's the first reason. But second of all, more substantively, if you look at Section 12-62, F as in Frank, and then I believe it's number 2 if I'm reading my handwriting correctly, your city code has something called a BFOQ, a bona fide occupational qualification exception to that criminal conviction criteria. And the reason that's there, just to give you an extreme example, if you're a bank robber, you don't get to work for a bank because that is giving you the method, the means, the opportunity to commit repeat offenses. So there are BFOQs in other places in the city. One of the BFOQs, bona fide occupational qualifications, that has existed in the city of Urbana for a while and continues in this contract, is that in order to police the police, you cannot have a felony conviction. So I am comfortable that that is a lawful provision. Moreover, I want to emphasize just again, the conservative nature of collective bargaining. We did make changes in the CPRB section of the collective bargaining agreement. We got rid of the affidavit requirement. We got rid of the threat of conviction if a person came forward with a knowingly false complaint, thereby making it easier for people to come forward with complaints without having to fear repercussions for that. I can tell you that during the bargaining process and in mediation, we pushed the changes to the CPRB as far as we could to get a voluntary contract settlement. There were points in time during negotiations where we did ask for more reform and we were told no. So again, knowing that reality of interest arbitration, where we could go to interest arbitration, and if the union's proposal in interest arbitration was status quo, no changes whatsoever, we might not even be able to get the changes that we did make with the voluntary contract settlement. So the old adage of a bird in the hand versus two in the bush, we took the bird in the hand knowing what that reality of interest arbitration is like on the other side. there's also been some discussion both this week and last week about closed session, and I know a couple of council members have addressed that. I just want to give an example of why it's important to me as your attorney or as your lead negotiator to be able to talk with city council in executive session. And I'll just use an extreme example. When we're bargaining, we don't come to the table with our best offer first. So if the city council or if the discussion with the mayor and the city staff says, you've got authority to do, and I'm just going to pick a random number that's not reality. If you have authority to add 3% per year to the contract, well, in negotiations, if I come to the table and say our opening offer is 1% per year, and the union knows, because we've talked in open session that the real number is 3%, they're not going to take us seriously. So being able to identify bargaining priorities, being able to identify bargaining vulnerabilities, being able to identify where we do and don't have leverage is something that simply we need to be able to do in executive session so that we can come to the bargaining table and negotiate and work to the middle and reach a settlement that is favorable to the city's interest. So as I discussed last week, I do think that this is a favorable contract to the city. The wages are favorable, particularly in this economic environment. Again, a reminder, the wage increases are 1.5% effective July 1st of 2020, 2% of July 1st of 2021, and 2.5% of July 1st of 2022. Compared to the trends in the economy, that's a very favorable settlement. And we have made incremental change in ways that favor the city without having to give up a lot to get it. So in that bargaining reality, in that environment that's created for us by the Illinois State Legislature, this is an agreement that I recommend that the City Council ratify tonight.
Michelle, did you want to add anything?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Ben? Grace.
Thank you. I was wondering if we could have some information about the timeline here for the first negotiation happening in September of 2020 and discussion starting in March, and talking to the council once in May and then once when the contract was finished. So I'm just wondering if we could have some insight about if that is when they started and why there wasn't any more involvement from council or the public, and why it took so long if negotiations had started at that point.
I'll go ahead and jump in, and if Michelle or anybody has any additional comments. So I'm looking at my bargaining binder right now, and the very first meeting that we had with the union was, I believe, on October 9th of 2020. The contract did expire in June of 2020, but my notes indicate our first meeting with the union was in October. That's not uncommon. It's more common than I'd like it to be in the public sector, but it does happen, and particularly where we're bargaining in an environment of COVID. We did meet with the union several times based on direction from the mayor and city administrator. And then we did brief the council, and I believe you said Councilwoman Grace Wilkin, sorry. We briefed the council back in May, shortly after the new council was elected. And that was just prior to us going to mediation with the union. We went to mediation with the union on June 24th of this year. And we had one and only one mediation session. We were able to get the contract resolved in mediation with some back and forth by email through the mediator after mediation. But it was basically just the one mediation session after we met with council in executive session back in May. And I'll amplify too, and I apologize, I see Michelle's got her hand up there. I work with different councils in different jurisdictions all across the state, and different councils in different jurisdictions absolutely have different comfort levels and different processes and preferences when it comes to the collective bargaining process. And certainly as part of this contract negotiation, this council has made clear its desires for future negotiations. And I'm sure that the city's bargaining team will take that feedback into future negotiations. I wanted to pause. I know Michelle wanted to comment on that too, I believe.
I apologize, and I invite the mayor, Ben, Elizabeth, or council persons, Wu or Hersey, to correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we had met with the prior council back before we ever even sat down for a first time with FOP, or very close to a first time. So I think that was part of the issue, is we did brief the council, and then there was a very long period of time and delay with scheduling things due in part to the pandemic. So I know it seems like this has been going on for a very long time. There was a long period when no meetings were had, but there was an initial briefing. It was just with a largely different set of council members.
That's the other issue about this particular session, is that it started under, which is what happens when you have an election, is it started under one city council and ended up under another. And if I recall right, most of the substantial issues were worked out before this new council was even seated. Is that correct?
That is correct. I mean, when we went to mediation, we did have some key issues in terms of wages and economic items like that. But yes, we had narrowed the field of issues quite significantly prior to the new council being sworn in.
And the other thing that people should remember, it did, we are over a year into the new contract period. So there are basically less than 2 years left in this particular contract period, and which is not unusual. I've based on my experience on the council, there have been a number of times when we finished up negotiations a year into the contract and then had retroactive pay. So this timing is not unusual. COVID made it worse, like it made everything worse, but this contract spans 2 city councils.
The one other thing I would note too is kind of in the importance of that initial session is when we meet and we kind of find out from council what their priorities are and some of our authority. And I won't go into any specifics of it, but that was kind of where the team got a lot of its initial guidance. So we were given some direction, we were given some guidance, and we went forth based on our understanding of that. But again, there were, several different council members at that time.
And so then going forward, when it's time to begin to prepare for the next round of bargaining, then this council will meet and will have input and establish priorities for that session too. Grace?
Thanks. I also had questions about, the retroactively enacting this contract, particularly with some of the CPRB stuff, like removing that complaints need to be acknowledged with the person involved in the incidents, and removing the language about prosecuting false complaints. I'm wondering how that applies retroactively, if there were situations like this already in the past year, and then what the plan is on how to enact this retroactively.
So to that question, I would say the contract is effective July 1st of 2020. If that was an issue, and I'm not in a position to speak to that, I would not know one way or the other myself. But yes, this contract is effective July 1st of 2020. So that would apply retroactively as well in terms of not submitting anything for criminal conviction based on false complaints.
Does anyone on the city end happen to know if that is the case? If there are, unsigned complaints, or there was any prosecution of a false complaint in that time?
I know we have never prosecuted based upon an allegation of a false complaint regarding a CPRB matter. As to the other, I would have to defer.
Carol, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yes, we have had, there were a number of complaints that were filed, and many of them have been appealed at this point based on the lack of a notary. And we had some complaints as well that were filed by people who were not firsthand witnesses. I don't know the timing on those, so we'll have to go back and review those. And I guess we'll have to figure out if the chief will issue new findings on complaints that were, that were made where actually the chief didn't, now that I'm thinking about it, the chief didn't even get those because they weren't forwarded from the HR, what was at the time the HRO. So we may need to do some work on investigating some of the things that weren't investigated because they didn't advance from the Human Relations Office to the police department. So we'll have to go back and see what we're dealing with there.
But that is the plan, to go back and see if there are any of these that would apply and need to be validated and kind of reopened.
If you pass this, if you ratify this contract, then that will be the state of play for us, and we will do that.
Thank you.
I should just caveat too, I apologize. In my tenure here, we've never pursued any kind of legal recourse against anyone for a false complaint. I can't speak to prior to that, but I do know my tenure here would cover that period of retroactivity.
Any other questions? Grace?
Thank you. Comment, and then I do have a question here too. Just wanted to say that, we already reiterated a lot last week that it was a very frustrating process, and I don't appreciate not hearing anything since the initial conversation, especially if, a lot of the things were even figured out before then. There are a lot of suggestions that myself and I think other council members and members of the public would have suggested, given the opportunity, from big picture stuff to even straightforward stuff like gender neutral language that we decided on as a city. That could have been a very straightforward thing to add, given the opportunity for input. So I do think that, we need to do things very differently the next time, to have input from council and the public and have more involvement in that process, because there may have been things that wouldn't have been substantial in the negotiating table, possibly for the other side, that we could have added somewhat easily, as well as big picture ideas. So my question is, for this one, I was wondering about voting present. If I could just have clarification for the clerk, if there is any home rule thing that supersedes state procedures for voting present as a no vote.
If you vote present, then that will show in the record as a vote for present. But when it's counted, if it is counted at all, it'd be counted with the winning side.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I do plan to vote that because I think this is not a good position to be in. I don't really agree with passing this contract, and I don't agree with stopping it and taking something potentially in worse interest for the city. And I don't appreciate that we're in this situation to begin with. Thank you.
Sharice?
I guess what I'd like to know, since we did have the, if somebody files a false claim with CPRB and we're not going to, they won't meet consequences of any kind of legal ramifications. Is there any, will that person ever be named as filing a false report or anything to that nature?
I'm not sure which.
Do you
Go ahead.
As in a criminal case? Because filing a false report would generally mean a police report as opposed to a CPRB complaint. So there would
a CPRB complaint. It's regarding the CPRB a complaint.
So
are there any consequences for filing a false CPRB complaint?
the way we have this written now, there would not be anything other than perhaps if somebody who had the complaints or allegations made against them wanted to perhaps try to pursue some form of civil action. Ben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thought is exactly the same, is that from a criminal perspective, from a city perspective, there's nothing that the city could pursue against somebody who submitted a false complaint. And that's essentially the balance that is struck here, right? Is you'd rather get the complaint and find out that it was not founded than to discourage those complaints from coming in the first place. We cannot give up employees' rights to pursue civil remedies if they think that they've been defamed or libeled or something of that nature. So a person would still potentially have that kind of a claim that they could bring forward themselves in their individual capacity, and there's nothing that we can do about that. No different than a member of the public could sue one of your employees for on similar types of grounds if they felt that they were defamed or libeled.
I was just wondering because I know that a lot of people's time that are on the CPRB as well as staff time is put in to investigate complaints in general. So it's just, I was just thinking it's something that we already have our issues with trying to get CPRB up and running well, and to have false complaints can kind of gum up those works as far as keeping the city from actually, or the CPRB from actually looking into complaints that are real. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very legitimate concern, and one that's just a delicate balancing act, and we're going to have to see how things go over the next couple of years here. There's a very controversial law in another state, and I'm not going to mention what it is to avoid politicizing this discussion with something even more controversial. And that law set up a complaint process, and people who were upset with that law responded by flooding that complaint process with a bunch of nonsense. And that when you've got to sort through all of that noise, it makes it harder to get to the real complaints. So certainly, we hope that the public will use the CPRB process appropriately. I would like to think that they will. And if not, then we'll have to look at making some tweaks to it in the future. And by the way, I apologize to Alderwoman Wu. This is simply removing a contractual impediment to the way the CPRB receives complaints. If the council does find that we've shifted the pendulum far too far to the other side, you could always address that with your own ordinances as well. It's simply, your ordinances can't conflict with the collective bargaining agreement, but they could enhance it, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Mary Alice.
So I just, I want to dig in a little bit based on kind of the video explanation in terms of how bargaining in the state of Illinois happens and interest arbitration. If something does go to interest arbitration, then there's two separate kind of buckets, so to speak. There's the economic bucket, in which case the arbitrator gets to choose plan A or plan B, right? He doesn't get to pick and choose between the different plans, and each side presents whatever economic argument they want to present, and then they just select one. The second one are the non-economic ones. And so this is when we're going into the retention of records, the CPRB, all of those items. And based on what you said tonight, you said that typically they stick with the status quo. So typically whatever's in our previous contract most likely would be the direction that that person would take. So my question that I pose to City Council is this. I feel like that we're not going to get everything that we want. This is a negotiation between two different entities, and I'm sure that the union would have liked to see other things in the contract. And we didn't get everything that we wanted. We got some things that we wanted. I think that the records retention, the amount of time that you can use disciplinary records for progressive discipline, I think is a really big step forward. I think that removing some of the impediments in the CPRB is a big step forward for us. So the way I see it tonight is there's two questions here. A, does City Council feel that the economic portion that is agreed upon in the voluntary settlement if that is appropriate for the city. And if it's not, then we have to accept the risk that the union or us would win. So that's one side. The second side is in terms of the non-economic items. Are we happy enough that we want these changes that we have negotiated, or do we want to revert back to what has already been negotiated the year before? So to me, that drives how I make my decision in terms of how to vote for this tonight. I'm happy at least that we have started to build towards more accountability, more transparency. Is it everything that we need? No, I think we can do more, but I do think this is a step in the right direction. And so for that reason, I'm going to be voting for this.
Any other comments? Chris?
Thanks for letting me talk. Well, the stakes are just too high. A union of police officers is not like a union of carpenters, electricians, or factory workers. These are police officers, and there is no job like it. As everybody knows, police officers are authorized to use deadly force to kill you dead forever. Police officers are authorized to bust your head open with a baton. Police officers are authorized to sting your eyes blind temporarily with pepper spray. Police officers are authorized to administer 50,000 volts of electricity with a taser. Police officers are authorized to punch you in the mouth, knocking out your teeth. Police officers are authorized to search the contents of your pockets. Police officers are authorized to search the contents of your entire house. Police officers are authorized to search the contents of your car. Police officers are authorized to administer fines for the way you drive or what you drive in. Police officers are authorized to strip search you and do a cavity search. If officers accuse you of being a drug dealer, police officers are authorized to take your car, your house, and all your money. And on top of all that, police officers are authorized to persuade a prosecutor, a jury, and a judge to send you to a state prison for years or even decades. Given this enormous power, it's critical that these extraordinary powers are done in public, in the light, and in front of everyone to ensure that these things are done lawfully, with justification, and with good reason. This is the United States of America. We don't have secret police doing secret things, disappearing people to secret torture camps as is done in other countries. There is to be no expectation of privacy when officers do their job doing the public's business. So for years, it has been a travesty that the city of Urbana has allowed the Fraternal Order of Police to control, dictate, and limit the city's Civilian Police Review Board through the contract agreed upon by the city and the FOP. So thoroughly disempowered has the Civilian Police Review Board become, citizens don't bother to use it, and several times the mayor has admitted to the public that the Civilian Police Review Board ordinance needs to be changed. But guess what? Council can't change the ordinance because the FOP contract demands the ordinance comply with the FOP contract. Also, this contract does not explicitly state for what intentional misconduct officers can be terminated. We need to warn officers that there are lines you will not cross and assure citizens Urbana takes intentional misconduct seriously and it will not be tolerated. But none of these needed changes were allowed to be bargained with the police union. The last contract expired in June or July of 2020. Nothing much was done because of the pandemic, and so it fell to the new council sworn in on May 3rd to finalize an agreement with the police. We went into closed session about the contract on May 17th. It is here where I need to apologize to my constituents. I naively assumed that because I was being asked to approve a new contract with police, I would be allowed to give input as to what needed to be changed. For the entire summer, City Council was told nothing. The contract was never discussed. Even after a contract was approved by the negotiators and given to the rank and file members of the union to approve on August 12th, Council was kept ignorant as to what was going on. Suddenly on September 3rd, the City Council was given its first look at the new contract and told to approve it on September 7th. In closed session on September 7th, we were told by the labor attorney that no changes could be made to the contract because that would be an impasse and the entire proceeding would be given to something called an interest arbitrator, something we were hearing for the first time. I'd like to thank Michelle Brooks and Ben Gert for their efforts on the contract. I appreciated their candor. They did improve this contract in several ways, and I want to acknowledge that. As for my council colleagues, I respect however you vote tonight. I know you have the best interests of the city at heart. In my opinion, City Council is being asked to pretend that everything is good with this contract so as to avoid trouble. But nothing is going to change. Needed reform can never happen if city councils here and in the state of Illinois and across the nation continue to bend the knee to the almighty FOP. The FOP works for the city, not the other way around. Even though my vote tonight won't mean anything or do anything, I refuse to play pretend. Thanks for letting me speak.
Any other comments? James.
Actually, this is more of a clarification. If council were to be split 3 yeses and 3 nos and a present, my understanding that a tie is a fail and that it would not pass. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Does the mayor vote on this to break a tie?
You can. I believe so, Diane.
Dave, can you verify that?
Yeah, that's true. It's one of the provisions for which the mayor can vote is to break a tie.
Grace.
Thank you. I had another question about the CPRB side letter. If I could just have some clarification on how this fits in. I mean, it seems like it's part of the contract, but also not, like part of the bargaining piece, but not the contract. And then at the end where it says that neither party is waiving its position or rights regarding whether the CPRB issues discussed and or negotiated during the negotiations were mandatory subjects of bargaining. And then the next one, that neither party waives any rights under US or Illinois constitutions, which the parties would ordinarily enjoy absent the execution of the side letter. So I'm just confused and kind of the bigger picture too, with the city being in control of the ordinances and how this ordinance is a part of the contract when that would be something that otherwise the city would have complete authority over.
So first, before I address that question, Councilwoman Wilkin, I want to go back to one of your earlier questions, and I apologize for that. The discussion that we had about retroactive complaints that were not signed or were not based on first knowledge, I want to modify the discussion we had in terms of the process on that issue going forward. If the council is in fact interested in making sure that complaints don't need to be signed. We've taken care of that from a contract perspective. While this discussion has been ongoing, I just looked up your city code and muni code online, and that personal knowledge and signature requirement is still in the city ordinances. So that's something that the council would have to address there as well. And to the extent the CPRB has incorporated that into their own rules and regulations, the CPRB should do that there as well to make sure that council's intent in that regard is effectuated. To your question right now, and apologize for the little detour. The language about preserving the party's rights as to what is and is not a mandatory subject of bargaining. I'm gonna have to dive into the weeds of labor law a little bit here. There's a dichotomy between what's called mandatory subjects of bargaining and permissive subjects of bargaining. Mandatory things we have to talk about. Permissive are things that we don't have to talk about. We can just do as a matter of managerial right, or perhaps we're forbidden from doing because of a union statutory right. So for example, waiver of statutory rights is a permissive subject of bargaining. We can ask to talk about it, but if either side says no, you're not allowed to insist on that change to the point of impasse. In broad categories, managerial rights are fundamental management prerogatives. The size of the organization, the overall budget of the organization, the organizational structure, how you're divided into different departments, how work is allocated between different departments, the standards of service that you want to provide to the public are generally considered inherent managerial rights. So those are things that you can do unilaterally by yourself without negotiating with the union. On the flip side are mandatory subjects of bargaining, and mandatory subjects of bargaining are things that relate to wages, hours, terms and conditions of employment. Very, very broadly speaking. Wages is obvious, anything to deal with money, vacation benefits, sick leave benefits, health insurance benefits, pretty obvious. Hours, what time do you work? How many days a week do you work? How many hours do you work? That's pretty straightforward. The final bucket though of terms and conditions of employment is a pretty broad and amorphous bucket in terms of what exactly is a term and condition of employment. For example, just bringing something into modern dialogue, do you have to get vaccinated in order to work as an employee in the city of Urbana? That vaccination would be considered a quote unquote term and condition of employment. So that would be considered in many cases, I'm not making any admissions for my union colleagues who might be listening to me tonight, but in many cases that would be considered a term and condition of employment. Now we get into emergencies and waivers and stuff like that, but just really, really broadly speaking, that's the case. Well, what happens is those two big cut buckets of information, inherent managerial prerogative, wages, hours, terms and conditions of employment, they overlap with one another. And when they overlap with one another, our labor board in Illinois applies something called the Central City Balancing Test, which is they weigh the benefits of bargaining over an issue against the burdens on management's inherent managerial authority. That's the standard. In terms of how that balancing test weighs out, there's not really a good way to predict how the labor board might rule on a particular issue. So when the CPRB language was created, whenever it was created, in terms of that balancing test, in order to get the union to buy into the CPRB process, which is not even, it's not terribly common in the state of Illinois. The balancing that was worked out was we said, look, let's just put, and I say we, it wasn't me, I wasn't the one who negotiated that language originally, but the party said, let's just put our swords away. Let's not fight over what is and is not a mandatory subject of bargaining, because that would be a really expensive, long drawn out battle at the labor board. And I would point out again to the discussion we had earlier on in terms of the law not being neutral, in which way it's slanted. I'm not sure that I like the way that would go, but the parties have said, let's not fight about that. Let's just talk about what the actual process of the CPRB is going to be. So that's a long-winded way of answering your question. It's a complicated legal issue. I hope I've addressed it to the best I can. If there's a follow-up, I'm happy to address it.
I guess the more direct question then is that, is this a required part of the bargaining contract, the side letter?
So, and you had asked it earlier, a different part to the question as well, which is why is it a side letter and why is it not in the contract? And legally, they have the same exact effect, being it a side letter or being it in the contract. It's added to the contract at the end anyways. If the city wanted to get hyper aggressive and say that we don't have to bargain over the CPRB at all. We could take that hyper aggressive position with the union, and it would result in litigation at the labor board as to whether it is mandatory or permissive. The union would take the position, almost certainly not to argue on their behalf, but that it is a term and condition of employment because it relates to who's going to scrutinize their actions. It relates to who's issuing discipline, who's second guessing discipline. There's a contractual grievance arbitration mechanism that the Labor Act says is the sole avenue for resolving labor disputes. If we wanted to send that question to the labor board, it's certainly something that we could look at. But again, keeping in mind the caveat that it's called the labor board, not the management board.
Thank you for the clarification. You see, I think particularly the part about felony conviction is something that's, been an issue, and it seems like this kind of ties all hands, at least until June 30th, 2023. My understanding is that this was a letter from September 2011 and is part of the agreement through June 30th, 2023, and then will be renegotiated in the new contract. And will that, I guess there's precedent that this is part of the negotiation, so it would maybe be in the same situation with the next contract?
Yeah, yes, with the small caveat that let's say that we're right and it is a permissive subject of bargaining. There's case law that says it doesn't convert into being a mandatory subject of bargaining just because you voluntarily bargained over it in the past. So that's why there is that reservation of rights there. So if it's permissive, it's still going to be permissive next time around. But yes, the next time around, if the council at that time says, look, our number one priority is getting rid of that felony restriction, just by way of example, then that would be the same bargaining process next time around, trying to remove that restriction in the side letter.
Thank you. And then my comment too, I would encourage us to highly consider that, taking CPRB off the negotiating table with the FOP, because it seems like this is the one avenue that the public and the city have for oversight when the police are already involved in their own labor negotiations, their own investigations about discipline, their own disciplinary system, that this is the one avenue that is more controlled and centered around the public for oversight and review body. And I don't think it's right that it's part of the FOP negotiating things on the table when this is, in my opinion, something that needs to be more of an independent review by the public and by the city and its board members.
Anyone else wish to comment? Jaya.
I want to start by thanking, everyone who's been part of this process, and especially my other council members or my fellow council members for all of their feedback and input. This particular contract, there are high stakes. I think, the concerns about the CPRB are very real. I would echo what Mary Alice said of also really valuing some of the changes, specifically removing the requirement that CPRB complaints be signed. I think that's a really important thing that should increase people's access to that process without fear of retaliation. I think that's really important. Changing how long disciplinary records are kept is really important as well. We're talking about going from months to years, if I'm remembering correctly. And I will admit I'm struggling with this. I have struggled with this. I've looked over it quite a bit. And the balancing the desire for more change versus also seeing those pieces that are really meaningful is something that's really complicated. I would also encourage folks to think about the fact that these challenges are related to state law, right? So I can say for myself, I will be reaching out to my state representatives about changing this, and maybe next time around, this won't be the same issue, because those are things that can be changed. The arbitration process could be changed at the state level. Our hands are somewhat tied because we have this looming fear of an outside entity, whether it's related to contract negotiation or if it's related to discipline of officers who may have committed misconduct. And so thinking about how do we change that so that our local municipalities have the authority to do what they think is right should be another part of this conversation as well.
Any other council comments? Okay, well, before we move to the vote, I want to thank everyone on the negotiating teams on both sides for the very, very hard work and really diligence that was put into this, and it was very thoughtful, as well as to all the council members for your comments. This is one of the hardest votes you'll ever make, and it's not the first time, but you're weighing many different factors here, including your fiduciary duty to the city, the overall operation of the city, and continuity here. But again, it's you're also weighing it against expectations and personal convictions and the desire for change. So it's a tough vote, but this is a very good contract in the context and the framework in which we have to operate. As Jaya pointed out, and as others have as well, much of this is out of our hands as far as the laws under which we must operate and the framework. The language with CPRB was set into motion 10 years ago, before any of us were, well, I guess I was around, but it's been around for a while. So we are operating to the best of our ability in the context that in the legal framework that we have to operate in. So I appreciate your very thoughtful consideration. And as I said, we'll be at this again before we know it. So there are other opportunities coming up for further incremental or further fundamental change in the way that you would like to see. So with that, will the clerk please call the roll?
Don't you need a motion and a second before we go forward with this?
We had a motion by Mary Alice and a second by Sharice.
Okay. Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Present.
Mr. Evans?
No.
Ms. Hersey? Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
I believe she.
Ms. Colasetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
No.
So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 yes, 1 present, 2 no. And the present will be reflected on the winning side, the majority side. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes. Thank you all. Okay, the second item on the regular agenda, it has been moved to new business, so that concludes the report of the standing committee. Thank you, Mary Alice. Reports of special committees. I don't believe we have any tonight. Reports of officers. Any staff with a report? I know Carol, you'll be at the end.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure that I acknowledge that I'm coming later. So
Okay.
thank you.
I do want to take this time to acknowledge the services of Lori Pearson. Tomorrow is her last day with the city. She has the honor now to serve as the next executive director of the Champaign County Forest Preserve District. We're going to miss her terribly, and there she is. Thank you, Lori. But, you know, given Lori's passion for the natural world, for outdoor recreation, for bicycling, for public service, for health and wellness, and for striving always to maintain work-life balance, we thank her. She's just provided steady, calm leadership of the Community Development Services Department over the last few years. She was before that in planning. She has worked both for the cities of Champaign and Urbana. did a brief stint, I think, out on the East Coast, and maybe worked for the city of Evanston. Is that right? Okay, so she's committed to public service, and that'll continue with the Forest Preserve District. And we will continue to work with Lori because, number one, I'm sure we'll see her out canoeing when we're there. But on the other hand, the Forest Preserve has been a leader along with the Urbana Park District and the city of Urbana in pushing the Kickapoo Rail Trail east through Urbana and on to Champaign. So we look forward to Lori's leadership on the Forest Preserve end to continuing our vision for expansion of the Kickapoo Rail Trail. And tomorrow is her last day of work. It's particularly fitting because it's also Bike to Work Day, and Lori was the person who introduced Bike to Work Day in our community back in 2010. So from all of us at the city, all of us in the community, we wanted to say thank you and good luck, and we'll see you in the forest. And I do want to let council members know that tomorrow afternoon between 2 and 3:30, there's a farewell party for Lori at Victory Park, and you're all invited to stop by and stop by and say thanks. Okay, we will move on to new business. We have my ordinance number 2021-08-038, which is the ordinance amending City Code Chapter 2, Administration, Sections 2-42 Appointments, 2-43 Term, 2-70 Appointment, 2-99 Civil Service System, Chapter 5, Building, Fire, and Flood Safety Codes, Section 5-12 Appointment, Chapter 25 Vegetation, Section 25-48 Appointment.
Can I move approval since you just read all of that? Do I have to read it all?
Yes, you may.
And I'll second.
All right, that's moved by James, seconded by Mary Alice. Just a reminder to people and the public watching, City Council recommended about 6 different amendments to the language last week. Those have all been incorporated into the ordinance that you see before you tonight. And Elizabeth Hannon, we'll have the staff comments first, and then I see your hand, James.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I did my best to incorporate all those changes that were discussed last week. If they are not perfect, then please be specific, and I'll get additional changes in there. There is both a clean copy and a strikeout version that shows the differences between the code amendment that you were previously provided and the current one. So that's all I got. I'm here for questions.
James?
I don't have a question, but a comment. Although I would say not everything that I wanted to see in here is in here. I think it was a constructive conversation, and we arrived at a consensus, so I intend to support it.
I think we also set the new record for the number of straw polls within a given agenda item. Mary Alice.
Yeah, I was going to say a very similar thing to what James had said. It was more of a working meeting last week in which we really hammered out all of the details. So I appreciate all the input and all the conversations we had surrounding all of these. I'm very happy with where we ended up. Is it 100% what I would like to see? No, but it's about 95, 98% of what I wanted to see. So that's pretty decent.
Grace.
Thank you. I had questions about this regarding the positions that we're keeping as appointment versus changing from appointment, particularly with the one like coming up later tonight, the zoning administrator. Seems like although that was, by ordinance, an appointed position, that hasn't been a part of our conversation. And so I'm wondering, like, for example, what if we voted no to change zoning administrator from an appointed position as it is now, but we had already passed this, so now it's no longer an appointed position in our city code. So I'm confused about how that works. And I'd also like to know if there are other positions like this that are not a part of the conversation, because I'm inclined to send this back to committee of the whole, because it is a really big decision that will potentially last for decades. And I think it wouldn't hurt to be sure that we have all the information, we know all the positions that we're discussing, and have a little time for another check for a set of eyes before this gets changed into our city code for a long time into the future, potentially.
I think Lori, want to comment on the zoning administrator, Lori?
Sure. So our zoning ordinance is not part of the city code. It's separate from the city code. And I think that's why it was not included in the previous discussion. Because it is part of the zoning ordinance, that requirement, that means there's an entirely separate process that it needs to go through in order to get changed. So that involves, as you saw, going to Plan Commission and having the public hearing. So there is, so it was kind of tracking along at the same time, but it was not part of the other amendment because it is separate from city code. I'm not sure if, is that kind of what you're asking, the procedural question?
Procedural, and then I'm also wondering what other positions also fall into this category, and if that's something we need to stipulate, or other positions as required by ordinance. I think that's an important thing here, because is it only these handful of positions throughout the entire city, or are we saying that there are other positions that are required to be appointed by ordinance? And it seems kind of silent here. It doesn't say that also are appointed. It seems like we've made it to where these are the only appointed positions. So I think that we need some clarity on that. I'd like to know if there are other positions that fall into the same category that are appointed by ordinance, and then how we rectify that in the city code.
Elizabeth?
I do not think there are any others. In fact, I did a search of the entire code for the words appointment and appointed. And that is in fact why you see in there's a section in, for example, chapter 25 about the arborist, right? So that was picked up in that search. So I'm confident that there's nothing else in the code where there's a specific requirement for a position to be appointed. One of the things, and that was confusing, right? Because they were kind of all over the place, but I'm confident that they're all captured here.
This has been something that's been needed to be cleaned up and fundamentally fixed for many, many years, and we've gotten to it. So this is a major step forward. There aren't any other positions as far as we know. Some of those positions that are specified here are required by state law, not city code, but they have to be incorporated into our code. And the others made sense from an operational standpoint and from the standpoint of really becoming a more professional way of doing business here in the city of Urbana.
And if I could clarify that, because you're saying that the zoning administrator didn't get picked up on your search through the code because it's not mentioned in the code as appointment, it's in the ordinance. Is that right?
Correct. For some reason, I don't think, Lori and I discussed this, and I don't think either of us really understands the history here, but for some reason, our zoning ordinance is not actually part of the city code.
I'm just wondering how you could have the same confidence then that by searching the code that we're not missing any other positions that aren't in the code but are in the ordinances.
Well, I'll just mention that. So if you look at the city website under city code, it lists city code, zoning ordinance, and then building codes. And the building codes are separate. That's a national standard for the most part, or state standard. So it was the city code and then the zoning ordinance are the two pieces. There was another section that, for whatever reason, chapter 5 is kind of extracted from city code. So I don't think Elizabeth picked it up on her search, but it was something that I was cognizant of because it's also in community development and has to do with building official. So that Elizabeth was able to incorporate that in this amendment.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments at this point? I'm going to see if anyone else wants to comment, Grace, before you go. Okay, go ahead, Grace.
Thank you. I was just wondering if I could get some insight on section 3 about why that's in there and if that's typical, saying that this ordinance shall not be construed to affect any suit or proceeding pending in any court or any rights acquired or liabilities incurred, nor shall any right or remedy of character be lost, impaired, or affected by this ordinance. And I just didn't know if that was standard or what was the rationale for that part of the ordinance.
City Attorney Dave Wesner.
Sure, I can hopefully help that answer that question. You know, in a lot of codes, once you make a change, the question becomes, if you have a pending case in court, what is the court going to review to make that decision? Typically what they do is review the code at the time that the occurrence arose. So what this is just allowing for is the idea is that if there was some suit, and I don't believe that there are any, if there's other that may comment, if the mayor or Administrator Mitten knows, where it will be affected by this, but a lot of times you'll see that these sections remain in all ordinances that may be adopted, just to kind of cover that potential, to make sure that people are clear that if there's a lawsuit pending and under a previous code provision, that's what the court is actually going to review to make its decision, even though the council may have made a change to that going forward.
Any other comments? Okay, we have a motion by.
Oh, sorry, I still have more questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, one more. I was also wondering in here, so hypothetically, how would this work in the order of our agenda? Say we hypothetically passed this ordinance and hypothetically did not pass the zoning administrator changing from appointed position. Where does that leave us? And I guess the point of the question there too would it make sense to add a thing about these positions or others as required by ordinance for even tonight? Hypothetically, I feel like if we pass this as it stands, it seems like there's almost no point in voting on the next one if it excludes it. I'm not really sure on that. Or if it would be worth adding that also for maybe future, say we make a new commission and they have a new person that they want appointed, if it could be done by ordinance, or in the future, a next council and mayor would have to update the city code to add a position, or they could just make an ordinance for a new position or commission or whatever it might be in the future.
Elizabeth?
So I think one of our goals here was to get everything in one place, right? Having it kind of scattered throughout the code has led to a lot of confusion. So I think it would be important to get it in one place. And I guess hypothetically, if this ordinance passes and the one relating to the zoning administrator doesn't, I could probably come back with a simple code amendment to add that to the list here. I think there's a big benefit in being able to see them all together.
The code is a living document, so it can be amended as needed. All right, are we ready to vote? I think we are. All right, will the clerk please call the roll? This was moved by James and seconded by Mary Alice. Do I need to read this ordinance again?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Wu,
Yes.
Councilmember Evans,
Yes.
Councilmember Hersey,
Yes.
Councilmember Colasetti,
Yes.
Councilmember Bishop,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkin,
No.
Councilmember Quisenberry.
Yes.
That motion passes. Thank you. Last item of new business is ordinance number 2021-09-039, an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning ordinance with changes to Article 11, which is administration, enforcement, amendments, and fees, and other relevant sections to change how the zoning administrator is appointed. Plan case 2426-T-21. And this has the honor of being Lori Pearson's last case before the Urbana City Council.
Mayor, perhaps I didn't hear, but I thought you had moved up the one appointment item before this. Perhaps I got that wrong, but I just wanted to check in with you.
No, you're
Okay.
next.
Okay.
It's the second item of new business.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, I'm going to share my screen just to have a visual here. So you got a little preview on the previous item. What we're doing here is proposing a change to the zoning ordinance to address how the zoning administrator is selected. Currently, as you can see the language up here on the screen, provided you can see it, is that the zoning ordinance requires a zoning administrator be appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of city council. The zoning administrator, I listed some of the things that the zoning administrator does in the memo. To highlight some of those, it's a regulatory role. They administer the zoning ordinance, so they do enforcement, enforcing the zoning rules, making administrative approvals such as building permits, issuing other permits that have already been approved, such as by city council and also by the zoning board of appeals. So it is truly a regulatory administrative role. The proposed change, let me forward, next slide. Oops, the proposed change would be to, instead of having that appointment by the mayor, to have the individual be designated by the Community Development Services Director, as shown here with the strikeout and the underline, and then also another section which talks about the duties of city council. It would change to remove the zoning administrator from those list of duties. Now, we talked a little bit about this position. Since it is a regulatory role, really what we want is someone that is the right person for this role. So somebody that might even be in civil service, but they need to be the one that is administering this very important document. So it's important that there's flexibility on who that person can be. And secondly, it's also really important to remove any perception that there could be potential for political influence over this regulatory role, because we don't want to be put in a position where somebody isn't enforcing something or isn't approving something because of a potential perception of political influence. So those are the reasons for the change. This did go to Plan Commission last week at their meeting. They held a public hearing for this item. Plan Commission, with a vote of 6-0, recommended that City Council approve this change.
Questions for Lori?
Diane, I have a question. It's Mary
Okay,
Alice.
I'm not seeing, okay, there you go. All right.
All right.
Go ahead.
So the practice for the zoning administrator, at least in the time that I've been around, has been that the community development head has been the zoning administrator. And so while I understand basically that this person would be enforcing the rules, not creating the rules, and that's kind of the delineation that we've made with appointments. My question is then, who would be recommending changes to the rules? Because typically that's been the zoning administrator. So would that go to then the head of community development if they are not the zoning administrator? And maybe that's a better question for Diane and for Carol.
Well, I'd be happy to take it if that's okay. By recommending a change, that is a professional judgment. So that is one based on the content. It is not based on the political world, right? So I really do think that that recommendation should come from someone that is not a mayoral appointee, because it is that technical professional advice that is being sought. Ultimately, it's up to City Council to make that change. It is typically, though, I mean, in all cases, you're getting the technical recommendation, and then those, above are reviewing that recommendation and signing off on it. But the recommendation typically does come from the technical staff level.
So remind me, I mean, this went to the Plan Commission, didn't go to the Zoning Board of Appeals, right?
Correct.
So do all zoning amendments only go to the Plan Commission, or do they sometimes also go to the Zoning Board of Appeals?
So they only need to go to the Plan Commission, because the Plan Commission are the ones that the they kind of have another role involving the zoning administrator, zoning ordinance. Whereas so they're interested in the text, whereas the zoning board is interested in deviations from the text. So it's, I mean, some communities combine these two boards because there is so much overlap. But in this case, the Plan Commission is responsible for the written document as well as the zoning designation of a piece of land, while the Zoning Board of Appeals is responsible for most, but not all, but most deviations from that.
So I know that Grace, you attended the Plan Commission meeting and asked some questions, and I think Jaya, maybe you did as well. Or no, I'm sorry, Chandra attended. And so for those of you who didn't have a chance to attend, or maybe you didn't listen to the meeting, the Plan Commission actually holds a public hearing. So there's a public hearing whenever any case comes before the Plan Commission, and Laura, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but then sometimes you actually have to swear people in so that they can testify during certain cases. So there is a whole kind of public input session even before it goes to the next level of City Council. So I just kind of wanted to give that context to council in terms of how that happens.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Can we get a motion? Does anyone wish to make a motion?
Well, if I had it in front of me, I would make the motion, but I can't find. There it is. All right, I'll move ordinance number 2021-09039, an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning ordinance with changes to Article 11.
Yes.
And other relevant sections. Sorry, here we go. Administration, enforcement, amendments, and fees and other relevant sections to change how the zoning administrator is appointed, which is plan case number 2426T21. With a recommendation for approval and inserting in the whereas, we don't have the number of A's and nays. So it sounds to me like it was 6 A's and 0 nays.
Yes, thank you for that oversight. I meant to point that out. Thank you.
Second.
I'll take James on that second. Further discussion? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
No.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
That motion passes. Alrighty, brings us to a couple of appointments. The first is for the Housing Authority of Champaign County for a term ending June 30th, 2024. This is a full term. This was the seat that was held by Chief Eddie Adair. I'm nominating Leslie Peter McFarland. He's a 38-year resident of the city of Urbana, and he recently retired after working as a technical engineer at WCIA TV for over 25 years. He serves as vice chair of the Deacons Ministry of Pilgrim Ministry Missionary Baptist Church. He's a board member of the Boy Scouts of America, Scout Reach, and is a leader in First String Incorporated. This latter organization is a nonprofit organization that involves youth, especially males aged 5 to 12 years, in Little League Baseball and other programming. His past community board service included approximately 7 years with the CU Boys and Girls Club, 3 years with the Stevens Family YMCA. His major interest is in working with youth in our community through programming and mentoring. Peter McFarland has worked closely with many families who are likely to be served by the Housing Authority of Champaign County, and he's particularly interested in supporting the Housing Authority's Youth Build program, which provides on-the-job training, resources, and support for young people ages 16 to 24. We'll take these individually. Is there a motion for approval?
I'd like to move to approve Peter McFarland to the Housing Authority of Champaign County.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Grace. Further discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
That motion passes. The other appointment I'm bringing to you is for Interim Director of Community Development Services Department, effective September 15th, 2021 through February 28th, 2022. And during that period, we'll be conducting a search for a permanent replacement for Lori Pearson. So I'm nominating Sheila Dodd. Sheila currently serves as grant manager for the city of Urbana. She provides staff support to the Community Development Commission, and since November of 2018 has served as acting director in the Community Development Services Department in Lori's absence. Her bio was on the back of this sheet attached to your packet. She's had extensive experience in city of Champaign for about 20 years. She then worked for Habitat for Humanity as the executive director for 7 years and came to the city of Urbana about 3 years ago. Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of Sheila Dodd for the interim director of community development services.
A second.
Okay,
I have a question, Diane.
sure.
Well, given that grants is it's ramping up here, are there any plans to assist Sheila with her grant duties while she takes on this new role?
Yes.
So we might be hiring somebody temporarily or part-time or something to,
Well, we also,
we have the RPC contract part, yeah.
yeah, right. We also, yes, there is a position available currently for assistance in community development. Another person has been offered is about to take a new position as well. So yes, we are providing assistance.
Okay.
Grace.
Thank you. I was wondering then, so my understanding too, if I can, because this is related to my understanding to the zoning administrator in the interim, because Lori has been director of community development services and acting zoning administrator in the past. Is that correct?
I'm the official zoning administrator right now, yes.
Okay. And so now that will be appointed by Director of Community Development Services, potentially Sheila Dodd in the future. So will that position remain open, or are we still looking, or is someone going to be acting zoning administrator?
So I believe that the future interim community development services director will will designate someone that's already on staff that has been basically doing this role while I've been overseeing it. So we have someone with 7 years of experience rather, in zoning for the city of Urbana, and that person will likely be the designee.
Thank you. And I was also wondering, out of some of the concern of potentially overworked, doing 2 full-time positions, was concerned about that being like a third one. So I'm glad that we're looking into that, so not keeping people too busy. And just wondering too, if that also goes along with the pay in the interim, which, I mean, I believe if someone's doing the job, they should get paid, but just wondering too, how many jobs and pay can a person have in the city of Urbana at one time?
I assume Carol or Elizabeth, thank you.
So in this case, she will not be paid for her current job and her new job. Her pay will be adjusted to a higher rate that reflects the range associated with the department head role.
Okay. And also to clarify that this is a plan until February 28th, 2022. And in that time, the plan is to look for someone to fill that role full time, correct?
Correct.
I imagine that these are, busy full-time positions that would be good to have two people doing instead of one person doing the work of two. Thanks for the clarification.
We have a number of positions to fill. We're working hard to do that. Yes. Any other questions? Okay, could the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop.
Yes.
That motion passes. Thank you. And the last item was the discussion item added. So Carol was going to give a brief update on the ARPA planning, and then since Sandra had moved to put a discussion item on about council priorities.
Right. Yeah. So just give a little bit of background on how we've got to where we are so far and what the status of the work on the ARPA funding and the concept plan that we outlined, which would be the next step. So the IGA with our RPC was approved by the City Council on August 23rd. City staff met with RPC staff on August 25th for our kickoff of our internal effort. The first quarterly report of Urbana's ARPA funds was made to the U.S. Treasury Department on August 31st as required. On September 9th, the Imagine Urbana staff, so that's the comp plan folks, Lily and Andrea, met with RPC staff to discuss the comp plan feedback that they've received to date and how that might be useful for the ARPA discussions. So one of the things that RPC is doing is they're surveying recent past public input that's come in through the comp plan process, council meetings, and other feedback, as well as the schedule for the comp plan public input activities, because they have a schedule through the end of the year, and they want to be able to leverage those activities. So the goal is to, where possible, leverage activities that are already happening to get public input, and also to limit the potential so that people aren't confused about, well, I thought you wanted my input about the comp plan and now you're asking me this other set of questions. So we're trying to make sure that that whole effort is coordinated. And then RPC is developing a timeline and a proposed approach to bring to you all for the concept plan development. And as soon as it's ready, they will bring it to you. So that's where we are. And I know that there's some discussion you want to have, so I will be available to answer questions and participate as appropriate.
Go ahead, Chandra.
Can you repeat that last line? You said concept plan development.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. Let me just go back and maybe for anybody who wasn't, any member of the public who wasn't in the discussion or didn't follow the discussion when you all passed the IGA, there's sort of three big chunks of work that we're asking RPC to do. The first chunk is to develop a concept plan. And this is an idea that we borrowed from another jurisdiction in Ohio, where basically they said they've gathered input from the public, and then the body, so in this case the council, then says, we've decided that our priority or our couple of priorities is this topic or these topics. So it could be gun violence reduction. It could be reducing homelessness. It could be, early childhood education, something like that, that's within the bounds of the ARPA funds that they can be used for. And then once that concept plan of like, what do we want to do and what does success look like? What are the metrics that we want to change? Then RPC will assist us in developing a process for soliciting proposals. So we say we want to change this, and then we solicit proposals to actually have people implement a plan that will change whatever the situation is, the priority situation. And then after that, and all of these things will be circulated through the council, so it's not happening behind closed doors or anything. And then after that, they will help us track the funds. They'll help us track the funds throughout, but then they'll also help us track the performance of anybody that we actually contract to do implementation, because we have to be able to show to the federal government that the funds were used and actually effectuated change. So those are the three chunks of work: concept plan, proposals, implementation.
And I'll jump in here. I just want to clarify also, there's no one correct way to approach allocating the ARPA funding. The federal government is, their guidelines were pretty clear on what the money could and could not be used for. But as far as the method that communities use to reach their decisions, it's up to the community. So you're seeing all sorts of different approaches, even here in Champaign County, but there's no one particular method that people have to use. And we're just trying to take advantage of all the information, first of all, that's been collected so far this year in the comp plan process, which is a tremendous amount. And that'll be a good start on this. And of course, then there will be extensive community engagement as well.
And I might just add before you take another question that, one of the reasons why we're delighted that RPC was available to do this is not only on the reporting to the federal government, but because it's a routine part of their work to do public engagement. So we're looking forward to getting recommendations about what they think is most effective, because they have tried different things over time. And so dovetailing that, their experience with what's been effective for the comp plan, I think will be very helpful in this process.
And if this process is anything like what it took just to get the first report in, I spent better part of the day just collecting all the required documentation they needed from me personally to submit the information. So we're happy to have the assistance of RPC on this, because we just, it's a very time-consuming process. James, is that your hand?
Yeah, so I understand we're going to be getting a timeline from the RPC. Will we at the same time get a roadmap of these public engagement opportunities that they're going to do? Is that part of the timeline?
Yes.
So that's when what I'm hearing is that's when we are going to be going out to the public, and as council members, we can encourage people to engage in those activities based on the schedule. And that is gathering all of the information that then we as council will process and say, what are the big ideas that we think the input leads towards, which is why we're not asking for specific solutions. We're looking for the problems to solve and creating the vision of success before we go out and solicit proposals to accomplish the solutions.
That's exactly right.
Have I got it? Okay. Thank you.
Yes, you got it.
Go ahead, Grace.
Thank you. I definitely recognize and appreciate the importance of working with RPC on this and value their experience and expertise on this. I'm just with reading the agreement. I mean, it very clearly says that the commission, RPC, will assist the city in developing a concept plan addressing those areas.
Right.
I was imagining that it would be a much more involved process, and if anything, coming more from the city-led side rather than waiting for RPC to show us a concept plan that's already developed when it very clearly says that they would assist us in developing such a plan.
Yeah, the concept plan is the output of this public process. So I'm going to borrow James's language because it's better than mine. It's identifying what problems do we want to tackle. So we have a public process. The public says, I want you to tackle this problem. I want you to tackle that problem and this problem and that problem and that problem. And then the council will take in all that information. And then the concept plan is the expression of what problems you decide, what problem or problems you decide you want to tackle with the ARPA funds. So the concept plan is not the public engagement. It is the product of your consideration and prioritization of what you hear from that public engagement process.
And it will be informed also by what you hear from communities around. So, you know, the county, the city of Champaign, the county are also engaged in this process. They have a little bit different approach, but I suspect that you're going to see some common themes emerge in terms of what people are concerned about, what they really want us to focus on, and how they want this money to be spent. And frankly, the more we can work with our neighboring communities, I think the better in terms of leveraging these funds to really move the needle on something. So we're part of the countywide process. We're part of the nationwide process, actually. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
What will RPC be presenting us? Because I thought it was sounding like you said they were working on the concept plan development and would be presenting us something. So what, is that true? What would they be presenting us?
They're working on the timeline and the approach to public engagement to get this feedback that will then inform the concept plan.
Yes, thank you. And do we have access to the ARPA quarterly report? Is that shared?
I can find out. There wasn't much in it because we hadn't spent any money yet, but I can find out.
Yeah, basically the quarterly report is the expenditures.
I don't know if that's something that you can access, you know, on, you know.
It ought to be public information. I'm assuming it's public information.
Yeah, I'll find out how to get that for you.
Chris?
Yeah, Carol, Diane, do you know where is the money coming from to pay the RPC administrator?
That's part of it's the ARPA funds.
And it's $400,000, is that right?
Over time, I think all you authorized so far in a budget amendment was $100,000.
Okay, but it's expected to over 3 years or 4 years to be 400,000.
Something like that, yeah.
It's similar to what the county is paying them as well. And one of it's an allowable expense under the ARPA Act, and it recognizes the fact that many communities would not have internal staff to manage the whole process and manage the reporting, which is highly detailed. So it did allow communities to pay for the necessary staff to administer these funds. Larger cities had, you know, a lot of the larger cities had layers of staff. City of Urbana doesn't. Not to do something of this magnitude and this complexity. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I'm asking you, Grace, I mean, second part of your motion tonight was to discuss our priorities. I know, Chandra, you've been waiting to do this. So my question would be, do you want to wait till we get public input before we discuss it, or how do you want to go forward?
I'm down for doing this however, works out best. I will say, just that was my other comment here, is that I think that there needs to be very involved process here from the public directly on this issue too, not just from the comp plan, because last time I talked to them, they didn't feel like they had a very representative set of opinions from it so far from the community. So I think we need to have direct input from the community and also from council members, because there may be members from the public who share something with their council member that they might not otherwise in their public comment or in the comp plan. And so I think that there needs to be a lot of involvement from council and from the public, however that may be. There are already some groups that are interested in doing presentations about general priorities. And so I think that it needs to be a very involved process. And it seems it would make sense to meet with RPC and have that be a collaborative process. And I would like to have that started sooner rather than later. It doesn't seem to make sense to me that we wait for them to do some of the work and then come to us. I think it would make sense to be a collaborative process from the beginning.
Well, just to be clear, I want to just clarify two things. One is, we're not relying on the comp plan process, but we've been in an extensive public engagement for a long time. And so we don't want to not tap into that effort, to the extent that there's information that's useful. The other thing is, we're in the comp plan process. We're going to be embarking. The next thing clearly is in terms of a big public engagement, it's going to be the ARPA thing. Then that will be followed at some point by the reimagining the public safety in Urbana. And so if this is too, I think it needs to be organized. So if we start having random presentations and people, and it's out of context of this process, I think it could be confusing to the public. So, I would encourage allowing us to come up with a plan and then have the feedback, be structured in that framework, so that it's not a scattershot. Because we're asking a lot from the public, and if they get confused, then they tend to just be disinclined to engage.
Chandra?
So this extensive comment that the comprehensive plan has gathered so far, is that available for us to start looking at, or has that been organized in the way that we can look at it? So then we can, just start moving forward on this. I feel like that myself and the council and the rest of some other members of the council feel like we have been sort of stagnant on this process. And we just want to make sure that we're involved. And I understand, there are different sort of pockets to this, and I like how you broke it down into the three things: the concept plan, soliciting proposals, and tracking funds, performance, and implementation. So this concept plan, where you're gathering input from the public, like if we have some of that already, shouldn't we be moving forward on that a little bit? And I think the talk tonight about priorities was sort of to say, I think that a big issue we need to address in our community is affordable housing and community violence. So if those are my two priorities, then I want to hear from the rest of the council members what their priorities are. And then we look at public input to see if, are our priorities off base and that's not what the public wants us to focus on. I think the two can be moving at the same time.
Well, I think the practice is typically, particularly for decision makers, to get public input first before they start articulating their own priorities. But if you have a preference for doing that in a different order, we can talk to RPC about what kind of a framework that would be. But we thought you actually wanted to get the public input first.
I mean, we've had public input, sorry to interrupt you, but I feel like we've had public input for, since this pandemic has started about things that are in crises in our community. And so I don't think that we, and then you said you have this extensive input from the comprehensive plan. We have a starting point. We don't necessarily have to, wait more weeks to gather more input. So I just think we can take a little action on what we have already, is what I'm saying.
Okay, I'm just going to say I hear you for the moment.
Mary Alice?
So I understand, Chandra, where you're coming from, that we've been hearing from a lot of different people about things that they are concerned about. But the question, the very, very direct question right now is, I think that we're kind of confounding two issues. One, what is the best direction for our community in the use and utilization of these specific funds? Like, where should these funds be steered towards? What do we want to impact change on? But the other part that you've been talking about, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but is kind of as a personal, like, these are my goals for the city. These are the goals of things that I want to work on and work towards for change. And that's much more of a general thing. So I feel like there's two different conversations going on here. Chandra, please correct me if I'm wrong, and I'll just give you my input in terms of what I see for the ARPA funding. I mean, I come from the qualitative background of grounded theory, which is you work from the ground up, which is the public up. So you look and you hear what the public is saying about the specific utilization of these funds and how we can direct these resources, and then build upon themes in terms of what that is, and then have a city council conversation about what we heard at those public themes, and then go up to the next stage with, these are the categories that we want funding for. That's kind of how I see things.
So these are like my own personal goals. Obviously, I'm all for affordable housing and a decrease in community violence, but these are things that I've heard from the community, sitting here and being out in the community. I didn't just bring those up by myself. So I feel like we have heard at least some things from the public that can get us moving. And I understand, yes, all the input from the public is very important, but then if the public doesn't see us moving on their input, like, then we get, this, oh, you're moving behind closed doors. You're not acting on what we are asking you to act on. So that's all I'm saying. So no, they're not my own personal goals. I mean, if I'm trying to save the world, for sure, those are my goals too. But overall, we've heard on just in the 4 months we've been sitting on this council, the things that the community are needing. We don't have to take more time to gather more input. I mean, we will, absolutely, but I don't think we need to sit here any further and wait. We know what the priorities are.
Can I ask a question? When you say moving, what do you mean by that then?
So if it's the first step is to create this concept plan, what does that look like after what's the next step after gathering input?
Well, the way I see it is you're going to have to get in your mind that you have a limited amount of funding, right? And you want to move the needle. And I think most communities feel this way. And some of them who have taken broad input realize that shotgun approach is going to be dribbling out little bits to different efforts and not moving the needle in one area. So I think what is going to be challenging for you all is to not only set a priority, a general, reduce gun violence and increase affordable housing, but what can we do if you decide those are the two priorities and you're going to give roughly $6 million to each? What can you do with that? And how far does that go? If you want to move the needle, how far can you move the needle? What realistic expectations can you have? And so that's what the real challenge is. And that's one of the things that I think we want to directly ask the public, which is, what do you want to see change? Not just broad strokes, but what do you think with, the totality of the money or half the money or whatever, how can we make real change? And we haven't put that question to the community yet. And so I think we have some, we have those sort of generalized pieces of feedback from the comp plan effort, but we don't have specific ideas about what it's going to take. And so the real challenge for you all is to be able to narrow and focus the effort so that you can do something significant.
I think that's what this conversation is for, to find the narrow, or the priorities or whatever that are more specific and more narrowed, so that when we go to the public and say, we've heard a lot around these issues, what would you like to see done to impact, or as you said, move the needle on these certain issues? Because as you yourself just said, if you give them such a broad topic, we'll be having ideas and concepts and all these little different piles, and maybe not making as a large impact as we want. And I'll stop.
Sharice.
I think I kind of understand what both of you are saying. I think that the thing that I have to think in terms of is that this money is not everlasting. It's not reoccurring. It's not revenue building as much as it is an opportunity, to, let's say there's a particular infrastructure issue that needs to be taken care of. Something as simple as, let's say, lights on the street or sidewalks in a particular neighborhood or something like that. Can we use that money for that purpose, and how will it impact traffic accidents or the possibility of stopping people from getting hit, maybe or something like that. Is that what I'm getting?
There are some specific infrastructure categories the money can be used for. Broadband is one, and that's emerging as a theme in the county and in Champaign. I know is making sure we extend access to broadband throughout rural and urban areas of the county. Mm-hmm. Anything related to water, so sewer and drinking water infrastructure is another area that's allowed. And then there's a separate infrastructure bill, that also involves federal dollars.
Mm-hmm. So with the ARPA money, are we thinking in terms of the growth of Urbana? For example, when I think of the comprehensive plan and being involved, what I think of is how much I've been talking about our Ward 3 needs a grocery store and a bank branch to help grow the city, and not just that, but also I think increase revenues, especially considering that there is there are open lots or parcels that could be used right now for those purposes. That's what I'm thinking when I think comprehensive, and not just and also of course lowering gun violence. And I would say that a lot of people in my ward are probably hoping for that same kind of thing, but it would also impact the city as a whole. So am I correct in thinking with Chandra and Carol that's what we're thinking in terms of that, but Carol's thinking more, okay, so how do we go about doing that? And Chandra's saying, I'm just, and Chandra's saying, okay, so we have these ideas, and we've been getting public input for quite a few months about what things that need to be done in Urbana. And Chandra just isn't as myopic in the, focused on one thing as far as like what steps need to be made. Whereas Carol, you're thinking about what steps do we take to make that happen?
Well, we also first have to get the guidance out there on what the money can and cannot be used for.
Okay.
There are treasury rules, the Treasury Department rules, which is out there. So that's what the guidance with RPC will be useful for as well.
Okay.
James.
You're muted, James.
I thought Chris was about to say something. If he doesn't have something to
Go
say.
ahead, James, I'll wait.
Yeah, I just want to say that, through the campaign process and even in the last several weeks, I've had people from my ward reaching out to me, providing input on what they would like to see attention focused on. So I know that the public is already ready to start giving us feedback on this. What I'm looking for from a process standpoint is for the RPC to give us a roadmap for this public engagement so I can assess whether I believe it's enough, whether it gets to the right populations or as many populations as it can get to. Look at the timeline that they're going to say that they're going to act on this and bring this information in. We shouldn't muddy the waters with talking about the comprehensive plan. These things can go parallel. We can get input on both of these things in some circumstances. Some of them will have to stand on their own. But what I'm looking for after that public input timeline is RPC, and maybe this is wrong, RPC to come in, and my dream would be a facilitated discussion, like a study session, like a 4 hours on a Saturday morning kind of thing, where we're bringing the things together and people that aren't us are helping us parse through the information and grouping it and aligning it and finding the common threads that, we're going to have these big picture items that we want, but they're going to mean different things in our different wards potentially. And so seeing how it both bubbles up and then streams back out, that's best done by somebody other than us facilitating us having that conversation. The question is it going to be timely enough? Well, we know the timeline of what we have to utilize the funds. It may not be timely enough for people who want change 6 months ago. That I'm sure it's not going to be timely for them, but we have to look at it from the standpoint of, does this plan move us along towards that point at which, once we've had that facilitated discussion, that's where these thematic plans can come from. And that's where we start transitioning from the information gathering and the assimilation process and the strategic discussion about how they fit in with all the things we picked up from campaign, from constituents, from the actual public input processes, and start turning that into, these are the outcomes. Now, who can help us get to these outcomes, and what are our measures of success that we're going to hold them to? Because we're not going to do it ourselves. We're going to fund projects or investments that accomplish those changes. That's what I see in my mind.
Yes.
That's a 3-year picture in my mind. It's not, it's not December. We might be able to have that grand facilitated discussion by November or December, maybe not. Maybe that's not enough public input to be at that space. But that's how I see this process going, and that's how you have to do it. I feel, if you're doing it at this scale, it's really hard to put major investments in a place where they're going to make a difference and really drive the outcomes we want globally, with picking and choosing here and there. You can help some things on a shorter term scale. I think somebody said, this is not renewable income. This is let's throw this into the best, I don't know if it's one place or 5 places, right? 1 to 5 places where we want to move the needle, and see how it affects each aspect of Urbana as we do it.
And we do have until December of 2024 to obligate the funds and December of 2026 to spend them. So the federal government did give communities some time to be thoughtful about it. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah. I think Sharice kind of did what Chandra was asking for, which was, throw out a few ideas and priorities that she had for the money, a grocery store, a bank, whatever. And I think, Chandra, what I hear you saying is that if we were to maybe tonight or some other night, throw out what kind of our priorities are. James, you've already heard from your constituents what they want to do, and just kind of throw these ideas out to kind of give us a little bit of where we're at with it, and then hear the public. And what Chandra said was that we don't have to keep it the way it is. But I really appreciate how careful everybody's trying to be and how thoughtful everybody is, and that we're not in a gigantic hurry to blow a bunch of money on nothing. So,
well, the first thing you all need to know is what the allowable uses of the funds are, and we can get that information. It's extensive, and that's the kind of education that we all need before we really, that's the first thing.
Well, and just to add to that, I totally agree. And I mean, this is not like a once in a generation opportunity. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. This is an unprecedented investment by the federal government in the recovery of this country from the pandemic and the recession that that is associated with it. And so that's why we are trying to be really thoughtful about it, because it's easy to spend the money. It's not easy to spend the money wisely. And so, James, I think, really captured the process that we want to have. And so if you start having conversation, I'm not trying to discourage conversation, believe me, but if you start having discussions in council before you have captured all this information, then you're sort of, I think you would be perhaps giving the impression that you're not waiting for the facilitated discussion, which will take in all of the information, and we'll be listening, the facilitator will be listening carefully to everyone and about all of the information that's been heard and how that impacts various wards and how we can do something significant that is, that moves, that changes things, improves things in the way that, touches the most people. So I understand that you're impatient. I get it. But I think patience will be rewarded in the end product. So hopefully that's helpful in the discussion.
Jaya's hand is up.
Oh, sorry. You have to, this time of night, you're gonna have to wave. Go ahead.
I think I had mine up before Grace, but she's got her electronic hand up too. I think honestly, this is exactly the conversation we needed to have, right? And I know my internet's really spotty. Sorry if I'm cutting in and out. But there are actually quite a few different pieces. There's the ARP funding, there's the comprehensive plan that's happening, but there's also another piece that's been raised before, which is setting council priorities, right? So I understand that some of these things are being conflated, but there are current priorities that run through 2021. So I think I think we're seeing there's overlap and some of it kind of being lumped together. And maybe that's part of the conversation we need to have of these, James talking about things running in parallel. How do we make those connections, right? Because we've got all these different things that are happening. And if we don't know.
You're frozen.
Okay.
Updates? Oh, it's frozen.
Okay, if we don't know where you
Sorry.
stop. If we don't know.
So some of it might be about, figuring out that process for updates. And some of it also might be trying to more clearly outline, here are where these three different tracks are, and here's how they're connected.
So to the council priorities issue, which this is something, for you all to discuss, but in the past, after a new after the election and a new council is seated and a new mayor or not a new mayor, there was this process for setting mayor council priorities. And one of the things that did not happen with that discussion was there was no money to implement those priorities, right? And so the impression was given that we're going to do all the business as usual, and then we're going to pursue these priorities on top of it, when actually there were no additional resources available. And so that's why it's been sort of frustrating, I think, over the past 4 years prior to you all being elected, which is how come we're not advancing these priorities more? And it's because there wasn't any new money. It was, and in fact, we were trying to close a structural budget deficit at the time. So from, I think, my perspective, and I don't want to speak for the mayor, but we've had conversations about this. We thought that here's the money, here's the expression of council priorities. Here's the money, the ARPA money. That is the effort that should be spent on establishing council priorities. Well, how do you want to spend this money? For once in our lives, we have the new money to spend. And so that's why we're trying to spend the effort. We didn't see that was going to be a separate effort to do council priorities. You all may view it differently, but that's how we've been thinking about it.
Great.
So the way I see it, there are the general council priorities, as you mentioned, which overlap in a Venn diagram, possibly with the ARPA priorities. And that is an important conversation I think that we needed to have, and we did request to have as a council, and we haven't yet. So I think even regardless, outside of any ARP funding, we need to have that conversation. And I think it obviously does go along with ARPA, because as you said, now we have some money to potentially address some of these priorities. The way I see it from my education and experience, it's okay to brainstorm in the beginning, and these things are not mutually exclusive. Just because council wants to have a discussion and we talk about the initial priorities that we're sensing, that we've heard from our communities, from our constituents, that we see from our experiences as representatives, I think is not mutually exclusive from having a lot of community input specifically about ARP, and it's not mutually exclusive from what's allowed under the ARPA spending and what will work with the strategic plan. I think that those are all important aspects, and in my mind, it's okay for us to brainstorm and throw out council priorities that we already know now, reassess all those with the public. It's not to say that because we set these priorities, this is it set in stone. I think someone else mentioned that would be interesting to see. Are our priorities, off the bat in line with what we do hear from the public? I don't think that we need to be considering what are all the limitations of the spending. I think we can still have a fruitful conversation, even if there's something like, even if there's an issue where we see it as a priority, but it doesn't fit under ARPA funding, I think that's okay. I think we can still talk about it as a priority. I don't think that we need to be limiting the conversation in this very beginning preliminary step based on the longer term decisions. I feel like at this point, it's okay to collect all of that information and they're not mutually exclusive. So I would like to have a discussion maybe next week at Committee of the Whole to have that preliminary discussion that we have not yet had as a council about general priorities that we're hearing, and then possibly how it also ties in with ARP. Is there anything off the bat that might be a candidate that could be addressed with this? And then also go through lots of public input, looking at the allowable expenditures and deciding with RPC what's going to be the best strategy. And I think those things are all okay and would fit nicely together.
So one of the things, if I could just say, I hear you. I don't disagree with you in theory in anything that you said that you desire to do. What I am concerned about is that just as we had to go to RPC because we don't have the staff bandwidth to run this process. We don't also have the staff bandwidth to run the process to do the reimagining public safety. So we're reaching out to find some additional resources. And so what I would like you to think about and how we can best inform you because I know I've talked to Elizabeth Hannon about in the near future trying to give you a snapshot of where we are with staffing and the challenges that we're having with filling positions and just the attrition that we're experiencing. And so we are incredibly stressed as a staff. And so we can have conversations about priorities, but I want them to be grounded in a realistic sense of what we're capable of doing as a government right now, because we are understaffed and we have a lot of external stressors, and I want you all to understand what those are. So I want at least to make sure that that's part of the conversation. It's not because whatever you want to have happen has to be grounded in what we're capable of doing. And I'm not sure we've communicated that sufficiently to you all so far.
I had one quick thing. I think that we can desire and imagine and prioritize things that aren't currently possible. I think just because it's not currently possible doesn't mean that we can't want it to be. I don't agree.
Jaya, go ahead.
So I think just backing up for a few minutes, again, this is why these conversations are important of, assumptions that council priorities and ARPA priorities were going to be the same may or may not be true because we haven't had that conversation. As with any federal grants, there are a lot of restrictions for that ARPA money. So there might be things that are council priorities that are not going to be eligible for ARPA money. And we might still be in that dream phase, but we also might be in when we do next fiscal year's budget, here are the projects we are prioritizing. How are we working towards that over the whole fiscal year or the 3/4 of the fiscal year that are remaining instead of waiting until the last minute to try to figure something out? I think also thinking about the fact that there have been offers, and I think there are opportunities for council members to take some of that work off of staff. I know that you all are experts and it does still mean running things by folks, but creating initial drafts, taking minutes, right? Of like, if we're having a conversation about priorities, I pulled up the ones from, that we're currently under. It's a great, template to look at, right? From what you presented for the last time around, Carol, right? So I think that there are ways that we can be mindful of the strain and the workload on the staff, but also still move these conversations forward. And some of that, again, is just being open and transparent about, okay, this is maybe idealistic. What are the incremental changes we can make towards that idealistic goal? Where are those opportunities with ARPA? There's going to be some overlap, but I think even with the challenges, there's still ways that we can move things forward.
Chandra?
In one of my initial statements, I had asked about the sorry, it's late. What am I trying to say? Oh, the input from the public around the comprehensive plan. I don't know if you answered that, but is that input available? Could we be sent that information? Is it viewable for us?
I don't think it's in any kind of digestible format right now, and it needs to be parsed out. I mean, not all of the input is relevant to the ARPA piece, so I think that's part of what they're working. The Imagine Urbana staff and RPC are working on. Okay, well, what can we extract from that, and then that will be put in some kind of digestible form. And you can see that, and eventually you'll see everything, but it's not ready for prime time yet. They're still in gathering phase.
Grace.
Thank you. I was wondering thoughts from other council members or if staff see any logistical objection to having a discussion at possibly next week, committee of the whole, about this kind of preliminary brainstorm, with the understanding that, you know, this is not in substitute of any of the other processes that are to come. This is just a preliminary conversation that, you know, we did ask to have months ago before we were even in this more awkward position of it being related to ARP spending. And so wondering your thoughts on adding a discussion about general priorities and possibly preliminary, which one of those we might be interested in addressing with ARPA, given that we will still have a lot more input and decision-making ahead.
Other thoughts? Other people's thoughts on this?
I'd like to keep these conversations moving, so I would be in favor of it.
Yeah, I don't think it hurts to talk. To keep talking. And what Grace is proposing does not negate the RPC's method for collecting public input.
I guess
Mary Alice?
I'm trying to reconcile what everybody's been talking about, and Chandra, you started talking about like what are some of the priorities, but not necessarily the council priorities. And Grace, you were talking about the Venn diagram and how things are going to overlap. We've got all these different conversations. So I guess my suggestion would be, if we're going to have a conversation next week, it would be good to have at least some kind of boundaries in terms of, otherwise it's going to explode. Otherwise, we're just going to have all these different pieces of conversations. So I'd much rather have something that is more direct, I guess. And that would be my request if we were going to continue the conversation, that we have a direct conversation about X, whatever X is.
Well, that's in the past. They've always been facilitated conversations, facilitated by a third party. It hasn't been just council members. Of course, we were in person, but it hasn't been council members just sitting around talking about ideas. So it's always been a structured process where you end up with some, a product, a finished product. We don't know. I don't know what the agenda looks like for next week. We'll know more tomorrow. We have the meeting tomorrow to set next week's agenda, so we'll know how much time we have on the agenda.
What I'd like to avoid is having an agenda where this conversation starts at like 10 o'clock. I don't think that's very effective. I know I'm not very effective, at least in that kind of conversation. So okay, this will keep happening. I apologize for it, but in the schedule of the county board, we had study session times that were not the regular kind of committee time or full board time. It was study session. You knew you were going to be there for 2 hours and people were going to say their piece, and you got to see where people were on things and what was on their mind, and there was usually structure around it. There was a point to it. But I would be, I think that there might be value. I talked about the big facilitated discussion with the RPC about the input for the ARPA thing. I would be in favor of doing a 2-hour or a side kind of conversation, which we come to fresh and we leave, focused, if that makes sense.
This really needs to be on a day other than a council meeting, because we do have business of the city we have to do every single week, and that's at a committee meeting and a council meeting. So this really should be a special session,
being a person who has a schedule that's really hard to juggle at times. I know I may be one of the harder people to fit in an extra meeting here and there, but it just feels like that's what is needed here, because the immediate always pushes out the urgent if you're not careful about setting aside time to be strategic.
Grace.
Thanks. Yeah, think that a separate meeting would be good. My only hesitation is that that's what we tried before. We tried to have a special meeting months ago, and we made one attempt at scheduling, ran into a conflict, and didn't pick it up again since then. So I think that's my concern with a separate meeting, but I'm fine with that. I think, however, just for me, I think it's really important that we have this discussion as a council because we haven't been able to yet, and we cannot talk to each other together outside of meetings. So I would just like to be able to have that conversation and hold that space. We could have some kind of structure, like even everyone goes and shares, 3 to 5 minutes or less. What are you thinking? Maybe even no back and forth. Maybe we have another, 15 minutes or set time of discussion. I think we could have a loose structure, and I'm fine with it being a discussion item or a separate meeting as long as we can actually schedule that to make it happen.
Therese.
On some level, I agree with Grace on that, except, well, the fact of the matter is that everybody's got a job of some sort. Everyone's got some kind of commission or board meeting that they have to meet. It is difficult trying to get these schedules together. It's not, I don't think it's anything that's been done intentionally to avoid anything like that. It is just that it's hard to sync up everyone's schedule on one day or one thing, or not one thing, but one day that they can take 2 or 3 hours out to sit and have the discussion. I'd like to have a discussion as well. So it's something that I think is just a difficult thing to set up. I don't think it's anything done intentionally because of everyone's there will be a conflict. Maybe if it's a kind of a discussion thing, but not necessarily mandatory kind of thing, because everybody may not be able to make that particular scheduled time. You see what I'm saying? Because it's like anytime we have 2 or more people, it's an open meeting. So that's just kind of how it's going to be. And of course, we'd all like to represent, but there will be times when people are out of town, people have other meetings or family obligations that they have to meet. Let's just say if we try to make it for a Saturday, everyone's got something else that they're trying to do because it is a Saturday. And when you've worked all week and you've been in meetings all week, as some of us are, based on our obligations, either at home or in our job, it just makes it makes it difficult. I just want Grace to understand that. I think that's one of the main things. So I don't think it's anything that was done intentionally to not happen. It's just difficult.
Yes. As I recall, it didn't happen because not everyone either responded or could attend. So it wasn't for lack of trying. It just, there were conflicts. So this sounds like it was going to be an initial meeting or initial discussion. I really do think it should be outside the context of the regularly scheduled business meetings, because we do have things we have to get done there. But we could try again if you give us some suggestions on days of the week, times of the day. That might work.
Yeah. Great. Clarify that, yes, I was not implying that it was done intentionally, just clarifying that we did attempt to schedule it once. We ran into one conflict and did not attempt again. And so I agree that it can be an issue and something that just a concern that if we're going to do it a separate day, we need to be sure to do that and kind of stay diligent on trying to find a time that works for everyone or everyone who wants to be there.
Gotcha. Oh, it's 10:28. We're going to need a motion to extend or a motion to adjourn, and we'll try to find a time for a special discussion.
I move that we extend the meeting for another 15 minutes till 11:45. I mean, 10:45. Oh, God. 10:45. Okay,
A
10:40.
motion to extend to 10:45.
Can I ask what we're extending it, what's left? Do we want to continue this conversation, or have we come to a conclusion that we should do a special study meeting for 2 hours? That's my question. Do we really need 15 minutes to discuss more?
10:40, 10:35. Just extend it.
All right. I'll second 10:35.
Okay.
All right, clerk, please call the roll.
Miss Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Miss Hersey,
Yes.
Miss Colasetti,
Yes.
Miss Bishop,
No.
Miss Woken.
No.
Mr. Quisenberry.
No.
I forgot to write that down. What was the
4-3.
4:30 to extend? Okay. All right, what I'm hearing is a special discussion session, we'll say 2 hours at a time to be determined, and it'll be for the purpose of discussing council priorities.
Okay.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Good night.
This meeting's adjourned. Good night.